Hi, I'm Masad Ayub. We're in Miami, Florida, and this is Home Defense. Don't move!
Patio.
My name is Masad Ayub. For more than 30 years, I've been handgun editor for Guns Magazine, law enforcement editor for American Handgunner. I'm the author of the books Truth About Self-Protection from Bantam and In the Gravest Extreme, The Role of the Firearm in Personal Protection. Also, Gun Digest Book of Concealed Carry, and a couple of volumes of Gun Digest Book of Combat Handgunnery. For 36 years now, I've been an active, fully sworn part-time police officer. Spent 19 years as chair of the Firearms Committee for American Society of Law Enforcement Trainers, and basically have been doing this sort of stuff for a while. Our topic is home protection, and the emphasis in this film is going to be on armed home protection, the responsibility that it brings, and the tactics that accompany the practice. You've worked all your life to have a nice home like this one. It contains the valuables you've worked for hard. More important, it contains the people in your life that you most love, the people in your life that you feel responsible for protecting, the people in your life you have that gun to protect. The first thing to understand about armed home protection is the gun itself is only a piece of the puzzle. You really need a holistic approach, and to begin that, let's go now and sort of work from the outside in. Many police departments and sheriff's departments will perform a security survey at a citizen's request. That means they send a specially trained officer or deputy to your home. They walk the perimeter of the property with you, and you take them on a guided tour of the house. They'll show you where you can shore up your security, and perhaps they'll also be able to brief you on the local patterns of encounter, that is, the modus operandi of the burglars and other felonious home intruders who are operating in your area. You'll hear terms from them like hardening your perimeter and things of that nature, defensive architecture. That terminology doesn't mean you have to build a castle out of stone or put sandbags in the windows or concertina wire on the roof or dig a moat in the front yard and install an alligator. What it means is simple common sense. Here we've got outdoor security lights. These can be rigged up with remote sensors that will allow them to trigger automatically if something the size of a human being walks into your backyard. Or they could be triggered consciously by you from inside the house if you've heard a sound outside. Make sure that all the portals, not just the main doors, but also utility doors like this one, have solid deadbolt type locks. Now, the glass on the door would normally give me a great concern. Here, it's covered by the fact that we've got a telescoping heavy-duty metal storm shutter, which also serves as a security shutter, and of course can be locked when you're asleep or away from the home. Similarly with windows, you don't need to bar the windows, you don't need to brick them over, but good solid tempered glass, good solid locks on the inside, quick release, because in the real world you're going to need to get out the window to escape a fire more often than you're going to need to keep the archetype of the beast from breaking in through the window. And again, if we have these telescoping heavy-duty shutters, which turn closed like this and lock, you've really got the best of both worlds. A sliding glass patio door like this one, you want to have a good solid rod made of wood or metal that can go into the inside channel and physically block the door from being opened if someone's able to break the lock or jimmy it. Even with heavy-duty tempered glass, a strong enough man with big enough a piece of concrete or big enough a boulder can break the glass. And that's why it's always a good idea when you're away from home or when you're asleep to have these sliding heavy-duty shutters locked in place. As we go around the house, consider that while fences give you visually a sense of privacy, they'll only give you a false sense of security. There's no fence you can put up that's too high for one man to scale, let alone two, one standing on the other's shoulders. There is a lock on that gate down there at the end, but it's nothing that can't be defeated, and as you can see, even with a fairly tall fence, it's nothing that can't be climbed over. The hedges might be uncomfortable for someone to climb through. They're beautiful, they lend ambience to the property, but they're also a place for someone to hide. When you come out on your back patio at night, particularly at night, it's always a good idea to have one of these little high-intensity flashlights with you and just take a quick scan and make sure before you truly relax that there's nothing hiding in those bushes that might want to hurt you. Garage doors are a commonly neglected security point from the viewpoint of the homeowner. They're certainly not neglected by home invaders or by burglars. Do you want the automatic opening or the manually opening? It's a good idea to have the options of both. As you're coming home at the end of the day, as you pull into the driveway, you press the button, and as the door rolls itself up, your headlights will illuminate the inside of the garage and give you a hedge, as it were, against someone who might be hiding in there waiting to pounce you when you open your car door. As soon as you turn off the ignition, press the button again, the door closes behind you. One common modus operandi of these people is they'll come in behind the car, and as you're pulling in, they'll run in behind you. Before you exit the vehicle and turn it off, look in the rearview mirror and make sure that hasn't happened. Now, once you've turned it off, press the button and close the door behind you. One important thing with that, make sure the remote switches are only in vehicles that you keep inside the locked garage. If you've left it outside, all someone needs is a brick through that vulnerable side window, a press on that little button on the visor, and they've got open entry into your home. Once you're inside, a whole lot of folks will have just a little thin glass window door with a little spring bolt lock on it, separating the garage area from the main home. You really want to have a good solid door from the garage into the house as well. It tends to be a very neglected security point. You also, in case something goes wrong with the electronics, want to have as backup a manual lock like you see here. And always, of course, keep the key to it with you on your person. As you walk around to the front of the house, most people give a lot of thought to their front door security, but some can go further than they have. Here we've got good solid doors. You don't want glass in the front door for the simple reason that a junkie with a glove on can put his fist through the glass, reach inside and manipulate a single deadbolt and open it up for himself. We can go beyond that though. First, if you have an older home, make sure that it's a good solid door in a good solid frame. In some parts of the country, you'll find a $1,000 solid teak door with a $200 Medico lock, and because it's a 100-year-old farmhouse, it's setting in the middle of a frame that is settled along with the house, and an anorexic 14-year-old junkie can hit it with his shoulder and take it down like a drawbridge. Good solid locks and good solid doors in good solid frames. We'll talk about redundant locking on those doors in just a minute. That's best seen from the inside. But one other thing before we leave the front door. It used to be only rich people with mansions could afford intercoms, let alone closed-circuit TV. That's cheap technology now. And I'm not worried about the off-duty SWAT cop having this problem. I'm worried about the kid who's at home or the grandmother who's at home when you get what's called a push-in robber. They'll ring the front doorbell. They'll give you some BS excuse why they've come to deliver something, or they're looking for someone with a name you don't remember. And as soon as you open the door, they hit it with their shoulder, they're inside, and now all the dominoes are beginning to fall. With an intercom, with closed-circuit TV, anyone answering that door, including the least physically capable member of the family, can at least hear who's outside without having to open the door and thus open that window of vulnerability. And with closed-circuit TV, can see what's going on outside, can see whether there might be hidden accomplices around the corner waiting for the first one to get the door open. As we continue around the house, these hedges are beautiful, the kind of stuff you see in better homes and gardens, the kind of stuff that improves the value of the property. But it's also the Burglar's Guaranteed Employment Act. It's someplace where they can hide and work their glass cutters on the windows without being seen by your neighbor across the street, without being seen by the officer in the passing patrol car. If the hedges, bushes, and decorative grasses just have to stay there, it's non-negotiable. You at least want them cut low like this, so they're cut below the edges of the lower edges of the windows. The front windows, like the back ones, need to be secured. Good tempered glass. I really like these lockable storm shutters here. Some folks figure, well, I need to reinforce the back where the burglars can work in secrecy. They wouldn't come to the front window. The burglar doesn't think like you. Some of them are bold. Anticipate for that. Secure everything. There are 3 types of door locks commonly in use, and we see 2 of them here. The spring bolt lock is very common. Most crime prevention specialists will tell you not to use one of those because if the place is unattended, the guy on the outside can Lloyd the lock. To Lloyd means take a piece of celluloid like this motel room key, and if my hand here was the other side of the mating door, as it's pushed in, it flattens that, takes the lock out of its mortise, and the door can now be pulled open without being unlocked. They'll tell you abandon that and go with a deadbolt. This is what's called a single deadbolt, in that it takes a key from this side to open it, but a lever can turn it here. Now, there's no way from the outside, unless they have power tools, chisels, or very powerful shoulders, they're going to take this door down. What's not seen here is what's called a double deadbolt. The double deadbolt has a key-type lock on the outside and on the inside. There are pros and cons to that, and people in crime prevention take different positions. If you need a key to get out from the inside, when you're in the house, and if you have a solid door with no glass on the side or in the door that someone could put a fist through and reach the key, I would leave the key there. The reason is, if there is a house fire and you or other members of the family have to leave the home, you're going to have a heck of a time finding the key and getting it in that lock with the smoke. Being able from the inside to simply turn the lock and unlock it and go would be better. If I've got a solid door like this and no glass, I would simply leave the key on the inside anytime we were at home inside, and then you'd have the best of both worlds. Some will tell you don't have the spring bolt, have only deadbolt. My advice would be to have both. And the reason is, if you have an attack that begins outside the house, your child is being chased to the door by the molester, your mom is being chased to the door by the driveway bandit, when they get that door closed and a big strong man in a fraction of a second is going to be here pulling, they may not have time to turn the deadbolt. But if they have spring bolt and deadbolt, the instant the door closes, the spring bolt does its job and holds it long enough for them to turn the deadbolt. A good alarm system is an important component in your whole security package. As far as the hardware, that's changing constantly, and what was new and state-of-the-art yesterday may be obsolete by tomorrow. The other thing is you have to look at not just the hardware, but the quality and integrity of the installation and the installer. There are probably more incompetent and fly-by-night alarm installers than there are people who are fly-by-nights in any other segment of the security industry. How do you find out who's for real? Certainly you can check through your local business bureau insofar as registered complaints. But I've personally found the best bet is to talk with the local cops and ask them what system with what installer they're using to protect their family and their babies at home in the nest when they're at work. Your local cops know who has the good equipment and who's installing junk. They know who's going to give you a system that'll work right and who's going to give you a system that gives you false alarms every time there's a thunderstorm. You want to make sure that the appropriate people in the family know how to use the system to prevent false alarms. And a couple of other things that slip by a lot of folks. If you look here closely at this one, you can see that the brand has been blocked out. We're not doing that just for videography reasons. Your top-level professional burglars will make a point of seeking out people in the community who are tradesmen who have access to other people's homes, but might, that is, the tradesmen, have a substance abuse problem or be in debt, and in some way can be suborned under the burglar's will to become essentially a scout for them. They get paid a piece of the action every time they tell the burglar what house has stuff that's worth stealing. The people in the home may have told that tradesman when they're going on vacation, and the tradesman will have been primed by the burglar to scout out the location and tell them, do they have a big dog? Where are the locks? What kind of alarm system do they have? Some of your more sophisticated burglars will be able to figure out how to bypass certain systems. And for that reason, it's not a great idea to advertise what type of system you have, in my opinion. Now, it's common in crime prevention literature to tell folks not only put the big sign outside that you have an alarm system to deter the amateur burglars, which it actually does to some degree. They'll tell you if you have a low budget, get a sign from somebody who has the system and put the sign in the front yard and hope that scares off the low-level burglars. And some of the low-level burglars looking for the low-hanging fruit, it probably will. If you're worried about the sophisticated ones, and the more wealth you have, the bigger your gun collection, for example, the better a target you are, the more likely you are to attract the more sophisticated burglars and home invaders. You might want to consider work a deal with a friend of yours who has a quality alarm system as good as yours, but a different brand. If you have, let's say, ADT and he has, let's say, Brinks, simply swap signs. Now we've got a Brinks sign in front of the house that's actually protected by a different ADT system, and vice versa at the other house down the road. And that's one more stop point and one more stumbling block for the kind of professional burglar who is smart enough to bypass an electronic alarm system. Obviously, you're going to make sure that you've alarmed key entry points to the home, the windows, the doors, but there are other points too that some folks miss. Come along with me and we'll show you one example. Here in the attached garage, we can see an access point that some homeowners and even many alarm installers miss. If you look up here, a sensor has been attached to the attic access hatchway. A creative burglar can get up on the garage roof, chop through basically the roofing material, get into the crawl space, and now get in through the soft, unprotected underbelly, or in this case, overbelly of the structure. You've got to start thinking like a burglar and ask yourself, how would I break into this place? You'd probably need a ladder to get up there, and this is why we always recommend that you not leave things like ladders and step ladders laying around on the property. It's not just two-story and higher homes that you have to worry about that. Access onto the roof of a one-story home can be something a burglar can work with too. Lighting is an element to consider too. Any security professional will tell you if you're leaving overnight, or particularly if you're leaving for any length of time, install electronic timer switches. When the lights turn on in the evening and turn off in the morning, it looks to the casual burglar who's casing a place as if the place is occupied, and therefore would be a higher risk for him, and hopefully he'll move on to seek a softer target. You want to have a lighting system that staggers the intervals. Anybody who's casing the place, if they notice it always turns on at exactly 7 p.m. and turns off at exactly 6 p.m., is going to figure out that it's a robot switch, not a homeowner with a shotgun who might present a risk to their lives, and the deterrent effect tends to slip away. Another lighting factor, for God's sake, don't live in a fishbowl. It's amazing how many people will leave their blinds open at night. When it's dark out and you have interior lighting, you are literally lit up like a duck in a shooting gallery. They can see who's in the house, they can see where you are, they can see where you aren't, and you're literally making a target of yourselves. When night falls, it's a good idea to draw the drapes, draw the curtains, to close the shutters on the sliding door. A dog can be an important component in your home security plan. Even a little miniature-sized backup dog like Miko here. You know, backup dog, you carry it in an ankle holster, and if something gets your Doberman, you grab this little guy and throw it in their face. You're free, kid. If nothing else, it's a furry little burglar alarm. Don't kid yourself, though, into thinking that it's going to be an animal that can intimidate a violent aggressor. A good, strong, properly trained working dog can find people you can't find, smell out people you can't smell out, and intimidate people you can't intimidate. X number of folks out there aren't scared of getting shot. No criminal in history has yet looked a snarling Doberman pinscher in the face and said, "You ain't got the guts to bite me." One thing we've got to look at with the dog, it requires an emotional commitment that goes beyond the hardware. A person can go out and buy an alarm system and learn how to use it and take good advantage of it. You can go out and buy a firearm, get the training, and with some discipline, learn how to use that well too. You don't just go out and buy the dog, particularly a strong, smart, working breed animal that's been protection trained. If you treat it like a robot, it's going to try to love you, and when you don't love it back, your own life experience tells you unrequited love turns into hate. You've taught it to hate you, it knows how to kill human beings, and it lives in your house. You don't need me to tell you where that's going. X number of folks, when they come to you for home protection advice, before you tell them to buy the dog, assess, are they really animal people? Are they prepared to give that animal the commitment of time, of compassion, of love that they would give to an adopted child? If they're not ready for that, you might want to gently tell them that the dog may not be their best option. When it's dark outside but the lights are on in the house, you're clearly visible to anyone outside if the blinds are not drawn. Not until you've turned on the outside lights are you going to see who or what might be out there in that darkness. You've just seen the dramatic difference that lighting can make in terms of tactics. Looking over here at this switch, I want to be on the side that has the relative safety of the curtain of darkness. I want my opponent to be lit up like a duck in a shooting gallery. I would like to be able to control those lights without him knowing where I am to do it. Entering a room, any bad guy knows that the light switches are usually right by the door. And if he sees the light go on, he knows I'm probably right by the door by that switch, and he can turn quickly and engage me. This is your house. Remember, you have the option of setting up the battleground beforehand. Make the small investment in a remote switch console. Basically, there's a module that will go to the kitchen appliance or the lighting system, which is what we're looking at here, and it's radio controlled from a console that's probably best mounted right inside the door of the master bedroom or whatever you've chosen to be the safe room. From there, you can manipulate the lighting anywhere in the house. You can light up the hallway through which the intruder has to approach to come and find you, but you at the end of that hallway are behind that protective curtain of darkness. What's that old saying, gentlemen, choose your weapons? There's certainly a lot to choose from, and just about everyone you talk to will have their own opinion based on their experience and their knowledge. What you're going to need is something that's going to work for you, your experience level, your comfort level, your particular needs, and the needs of your family. The longer I'm in the business, the more convinced I am it's not about what kind of gun did you have. It's going to be about, did you have a gun? Could you get to it in time? Were you confident enough with it that when you took the felonious invader at gunpoint, he realized you were serious and you could end his life if he continued his attack? And if he does continue that attack, are you capable of stopping it? Only after those 4 points have been answered is it going to matter a rat's backside whether you shot him with a 38 or a 45, shot him with a pistol or a 12 gauge or an AR-15. Today, the semi-automatic pistol is more popular than it's ever been. X number of folks will tell you, nah, we're old school, there's nothing you can trust more than the old reliable six-shooter. There are tons of self-defense books out there that consider the shotgun the ultimate home defense gun, and the new modern wave has gone to the AR that many now feel stands for America's rifle. The answer is there's a place for all of them in the home defense plan. It depends on individual needs. Depends on what's going to work for you and for your family. Personally, I divide between the handgun and the long gun, and I treat the handgun as infantry and the long gun as artillery. When I say infantry, if we have to go mobile, if I've got to use one hand to communicate on the cell phone, one hand to manipulate a flashlight, one hand to carry the grandbaby from the nursery or put a hand on grandpa's shoulder and shepherd him down the hallway to the safe room, I need a gun that I can run one hand only very effectively. If I have to answer the door at 3 o'clock in the morning and I have this 870 or this AR-15 in my hand, I've got to remember the person most likely to be pounding on my door at 3 o'clock in the morning is not the home invader. It's probably a member of the local constabulary. Come to tell you that at 2 in the morning, they recovered your stolen car that was ripped off at 1 a.m. that you didn't know was missing because you went to bed at midnight. And if you meet your local gendarme at the doorway like this, your relationship with your local police is going to go downhill rather precipitously. I was consulted on one case where the homeowner who met the police at the door with a visible firearm was shot where he stood, and it was ruled a justifiable shooting. With the handgun, if you can simply tuck it back into the waistband or in the pocket of a garment, crack the door after you've checked to see who's outside through the window, through the closed-circuit TV that we hope you have, say, yes, can I help you? And it turns out to be the local police. The gun is not visible, no one is threatened, no crime has been committed. So the handgun, when you have to go mobile, is your infantry gun. When I call the long gun the artillery, I'm not just talking about the greater power. I'm talking about the, like artillery on a battlefield, in the home, you're going to employ this from a fixed, static location into a quadrant of fire that you've already plotted out. I've scooped my family together and I've gotten them in the safe room. And I know whoever's kicking down that last bedroom door is not one of us. At that point, we're probably past a solution that involves verbal crisis intervention. If it comes down to shooting, nothing's going to stop the action faster than a shotgun blast or a stream of .223 hollow point fire. But each, in my opinion, has its place. If I was going to advise a person who could only buy one firearm with their budget, I'd suggest that they get a handgun. The reason is it's more versatile. It's adequate for stopping power, if not ideal. You have that ability to keep one hand completely free, yet have a gun in the other hand ready to go if you need to as you're moving. And in a situation that requires you to range outside the house, you can do so without waving around a long gun that's going to frighten passing pedestrians, motorists, and neighbors. Similarly, if you've chosen not to carry a gun right now, but something happens in your life, a suddenly developing stalking situation, for example, and you're able to get the permit, you don't have to wait to save up to get the money to buy the gun. Your handgun that you can carry is already there. Ideally, if the budget permits, I like at least one good handgun and one good long gun apiece per designated home defender. By that I mean each member of the household that those in charge of the family have determined is responsible and capable of using a lethal weapon to deal with a potentially lethal home invasion. One of the mistakes that's often made is picking the gun for the dominant male member of the household, the alpha male, if you will. The 6-foot guy who says to his 5-foot, 100-pound wife, honey, I've checked everything out there, and by golly, this .357 Magnum and this 12-gauge shotgun are just the huckleberry, so these are the guns you'll resort to. And it turns out to be a gun that's too large for her to manipulate, particularly a long gun stocked for a 6-foot-tall man is going to put a 5-foot-tall female literally bending over backwards to hold it upright. She'll be ineffective with it, it'll be painful to shoot, and she'll have no confidence and little ability with it if the moment comes when she does need it. My advice would be in what I would call a pool weapon. That is, a gun that might be used by the husband, by the wife, or by the eldest child, that it be selected to fit the smallest and physically least capable of those authorized people. Let's look real quickly at some of the options that you have. The double-action revolver has been so popular over the years particularly for people new to the handgun, because it is the simplest in its administrative handling. Administrative handling means routine loading, unloading, checking, and cleaning. You simply open the cylinder, check by sight and feel that each chamber is empty, or can tell by sight and feel that any chamber is loaded. Close the cylinder, point the gun, pull the trigger, and the gun will fire. A little old lady with osteoporosis who might not be able to manipulate the slide against the spring pressure on a semi-automatic pistol, and sit here struggle like this, will be able to effortlessly open the cylinder, punch the ejector rod to clear out cartridges, and close the cylinder of the double-action revolver. In a situation where the attacker is so close, they're already in physical contact, and the gun has to be rammed into the body of the opponent, with the revolver, you can press as hard as you want, pull the trigger, and it'll go 5 shots for 5, 6 for 6, or however many rounds the gun contains. With many semi-automatic pistol designs, if the muzzle is pressed against a hard surface and you pull the trigger, it will not fire. The gun's going to be out of battery. That is, the parts are not in the firing alignment. If you have a 1911 pistol like this SW 1911, there is one little trick you can do. Leave it on safe, jam it into the opponent, pull the trigger, then release the safety, and the mechanism will hold the parts in line long enough for that shot to get off. But that's a little bit of sleight of hand to be asking someone to do when they've woken up 3 minutes before and now they're fighting for their life with someone's hands around their throat. One advantage to this type of design, here seen on the Smith Military and Police, with the integral light rails, the flashlight here, we'll get to the illumination benefits in a minute, creates a standoff capability. And that means when it's rammed against something, you can pull the trigger and it's still going to fire. It's one reason that I personally like this design, or this type of accoutrement, this type of accessory on a home defense firearm. One reason I like it on a police service pistol as well. The autoloader will have more ammunition. The single stack will hold 7 or 8 rounds in the magazine. These double stacks up to 17 or 18. The round count may not usually be what decides the outcome of the fight, but occasionally it is. Basically, we have to pick what the individual is going to find works best for them. One advantage we've seen with the semi-automatic pistol, not all designs allow it, is if it's carried on safe, like this 3rd generation Smith & Wesson, and an opponent gets the gun away from the good guy and points and pulls the trigger, nothing will happen. The safety has to be manually released before the gun can fire. Several tests have indicated that the average person grabbing an unfamiliar gun will fiddle with it, pulling the trigger, working the slide, trying to get it to work for an average of about 17 or 18 seconds before they finally figure out where the turn-on lever is. The home defender, who knows where that lever is, can draw, get the gun up, and instantly break the shot. So there are lots of things to consider besides what's on the cover of this month's Guns and Blasters magazine. With the long guns, let's move over here to the rifle versus the shotgun. The shotgun became the traditional home defense weapon in large part because there is versatility. You can load it with birdshot, tiny fine pellets, that, as you'll see shortly when we talk about ammunition selection, are less likely to blast through walls and cause corollary damage to innocent bystanders. You can load it with the traditional anti-personnel load, buckshot, a smaller number of larger projectiles that tend to saturate the target area and very quickly cause physical cessation of hostility. Finally, it can be loaded with a single solid projectile, the so-called rifled slug. And if we're talking a rural home where the gun is often a tool of daily life for other than self-protection, pest control, shooting game for the table, etc., that versatility makes a great deal of sense. The rifled slug's extreme penetration, however, usually contraindicates its use in the home environment. The 12 gauge historically has been the standard gun. Police have used it, military, good heavens, going back into the 19th century, really. One of the best kept secrets, I think, of home defense is the 20 gauge semi-automatic shotgun. It has about 55% the recoil of the 12 gauge. It's widely available in the short-stocked youth models for physically smaller statured people and fits them much, much better. The recoil is, as I said, dramatically less than the 12 gauge, yet you're not losing a whole lot of ballistic impact on the other end. The standard buckshot load in a 20 gauge is number 3 buck. It's 20 pellets, each of them 25 caliber. The analog load in the 12 gauge would be the so-called urban load, number 4 buckshot. That's 27 pellets, each of them 23 caliber. Now imagine for a moment that I and my evil twin kick down the bedroom door to invade the home of a couple. The husband shoots me with 12 gauge number 4 buck. Across the room it's going to be a pattern about this size, 27 holes, about 23/100ths of an inch in diameter apiece, and the projectiles will stop on the strap muscles of the back. The wife shoots my evil twin in the chest with her 20 gauge, which will be a pattern about this size, 20-25 caliber projectiles, going through the same pathway and stopping in the same area. Only the medical examiner is going to be able to tell the difference. But the physically smaller person will be able to handle the 20 gauge with much more speed, much more confidence, and much more competence. Even for the big, strong males out there, guys, you may get to where you can shoot a 12 gauge faster than I can shoot a 20 gauge, but you'll never get to where you can shoot and hit faster with a 12 gauge than you can shoot and hit with a 20 gauge. With new shooters, we found as a rule against man-sized targets like a hallway away, let's say 7 yards, the average new shooter can hit 3 man-sized targets with a 20 gauge, and the time it takes them to hit 2 with the 12. Let's look at different hardware entirely. Let's look at the carbine. 223 caliber, semi-automatic, 20-round magazine loaded for reliability with, let's say, 18 rounds, or a 30-round magazine loaded with 27 or 28, again, to guarantee reliability. The most common stock configuration today is this one, a telescoping stock, which allows it to adjust to the smallest statured female, and the large male needs only pull it in tight, and he'll still be able to run it, all the way out to long enough for the tallest man, and it'll literally fit any member in the family. Today, of course, for those who prefer the shotgun, we do have options like the Knox adjustable length and recoil reducing stock for the scatter guns as well. With the 223, with a 55 grain hollow point bullet rated for about 3,200 feet per second, you're going to have ample stopping power. You're going to have a very similar penetration profile in furniture and walls as what you would have with pistol bullets, a fact long ago confirmed by the FBI. What you're also going to have is much more controllable recoil. It's kind of like shooting a loud, vigorous .22. People who cringe in fear from that hammer kick of the 12 gauge shoot these things for fun. You have more rounds, you have adequate anti-personnel capability, very high hit potential, very easy to train with and gain confidence with. In a rural setting where you might have a situation that ranges outside the home and requires a distance shot, this technology, of course, would be an advantage there as well. Choose wisely, but choose based on your own needs and your own abilities, not what you heard from any guy who writes for the gun magazines or talks on training films, including me. It's not about us, it's about you. Some accessories for home defense firearms are more important than others. Certainly spare ammunition, and it's something most folks are smart enough to think of, but also perhaps the most important, illumination, the ability to identify your target. We want to keep the illumination as much as possible separate from the pistol itself. At the same time, a light attached to the firearm does make a lot of sense. That's not as contradictory as it sounds. Essentially, one is being redundant to the other. Your big problem with the light attached to the firearm is as we use the light to search, we're pointing a loaded gun at everything we look at. Now, if you think about it, if you've ever searched a room, you didn't search one thing. You probably looked very closely at about 100 things per room. And by the time you're halfway through a building search or moving from one end of the building to the other in the dark to scoop up the kids and bring them into the safe room, if you've looked at 100 things, the 101st thing, if it startles you, can cause a sympathetic response. We all tell you, keep your finger off the trigger and you'll be fine. The fact is, human nature, when this thing is in our hand, it was designed to be shot with the finger on the trigger like this. As little kids playing with toy guns, you grew up holding them like this. Most of the TV shows and movies you've seen, thousands of them cumulatively over the years, planting the seed in the back of the brain, the actors are all holding the gun like this. Any of us can make that mistake where the finger goes from here on the frame where it should be to here on the trigger prematurely. If that happens and we're startled by what we see in the light, we have an unintended discharge. And there's always the possibility the person we saw in the light was a member of our own family who we did not expect to be in the house at that time. That's why we don't use the gun-mounted light for search. What I'd strongly suggest is have a separate light. As you're searching, the separate light is the one that scans. If something has gone wrong with this one, or if you have to take the individual at gunpoint, now is the time that the second one comes into its own. If someone is kicking in the door and there's only time to grab one thing, now as you come up with a pistol, we've got everything right there in one place. But the gun mounted with the light is redundant illumination. Primary illumination should always be something separate. With the long gun, the gun-mounted light makes more sense simply because the two-handed weapon takes away the free hand you would normally be using to manipulate the light. Yes, we can walk around like this with the muzzle up and wielding our flashlight like this separately. Yes, there are techniques where you can combine the two together, but frankly, they're very awkward. Remember, my philosophy that I'm recommending to you here is to go to this gun only when we know all the identified good guys are on this side of the door and now something hostile is breaking the door down. Now, the ability to use the light already mounted on the gun gives you one last verification. The analogy, I think, would be this. If we were hunting deer with a telescopic-sighted rifle, using the telescopic sight atop the rifle to scan the countryside and look for deer is the height of irresponsibility. Again, we're pointing a loaded, lethal weapon at everything we look at. We don't know yet what's going to appear in that scope, and that means we're going to end up crossing people with that loaded gun, people we have no right to point a gun at. If you were caught doing that in the field, you'd lose your hunting license, and that would probably be the least of your problems. You could be nailed for felony aggravated assault. The same in analog occurs with the light mounted to the gun. We're not using it as our primary searching tool. But as we've come up on what we believe to be the threat, that final flicker of light is the final guarantee that tells us the right thing is in the sights. Just as the telescopic sight on the deer rifle, as we bring those crosshairs onto what we believe was a deer, is our final verification, a 3 times magnification, 4 times, 9 times magnification, that our target is, in fact, the legitimate target that needs to be shot. Another option to consider is the laser gun sight. These things have got detractors and huge fans, and which you're going to be is going to depend essentially on your given situation. I've found a lot of folks who have vision such that across the room they can clearly identify the threat, but their eyesight is such that they simply cannot focus on this plane, the plane where the front sight would be with a conventional sight picture. What they can do is use a laser sight that basically projects a red beam to the target and the threat. But essentially what you've got to remember with it, it's very effective for getting the aim on target. What it does not do is give you the illumination of the flashlight, the gun-mounted white light, that allows you to identify the target. Several manufacturers, Insight on this one, have simply combined the two with a white light unit with which to identify the target and the laser dot with which to index it. Even if you can't see the sights due to your particular vision situation, this will allow you to both identify the threat and put the shot onto the threat. Night sights, I think, are an excellent idea. We see them here with the XS Big Dot Tritium on the front of this Model 340 M&P. But again, you have the same problem that you have with the laser. Even if that laser was turned off, I've got a good sight picture, but in the dark, I'm not going to be able to tell exactly what it is I'm aiming at. This is why we have this circle of aiming indices and something to illuminate and tell us what our aiming index is actually on. There are other accessories that don't necessarily bolt onto the gun, but depending on the circumstances, might be even more likely to save your life. Let's go now and look at a couple of those. To someone new to home defense concepts, body armor might seem a little bit over the top. But stop and think about it. The cops have it. Why? They know the kind of dirtbags they're up against out there. Who are you worried about breaking into your house? The worst of those exact same dirtbags. Do you have a gun where you can reach it if someone with a lethal weapon breaks into your home? Well, if you didn't, you probably wouldn't be, or at least weren't considering it, you probably wouldn't be watching this film. Why do I keep body armor near the bed? For the exact same reason I keep the gun. The gunfire goes in both directions. If this happens, it's not going to be one of those movie scripts where they fire 100 rounds at you, the good guy, and nothing comes close, and you fire one shot and knock down the bad guy. The body armor is absolutely legal in every jurisdiction for the law-abiding private citizen, by which I mean some states do have laws that prohibit its use by convicted felons, and have enhanced penalties for its use in a crime, particularly a crime of violence. The body armor will cost you about the price of the next high-quality handgun you were thinking of purchasing. It defeats the most predictable weapons, handguns, buckshot and birdshot from shotguns, that you're likely to face in the hands of a home invader. The way I keep mine set up is like this. If you look at it carefully, being right-handed, I keep the vest closed on the right side, the dominant hand side, and open on the non-dominant side. This kangaroo pouch here that's designed for a trauma shield, I find acts as a very handy holder for the cell phone, for additional artificial illumination. We've got gun and light where we can reach them, with a quick release vault by the bed. Danger is threatened. We scoop the gun, we cover the doorway. The way this is set up, without losing my danger scan at any point, I can get the vest on, get one snap hurriedly closed, and then adjust the other straps as necessary as time permits. Another option that we have is something that you're likely to have at home anyway if you're a shooter and you're serious about training and learning how to use this thing. You're going to have some type of earmuffs or hearing protection, and if you get into it seriously, you'll have active hearing protection. These are the Gentex 1030A Wolf ears. With the toggle in the forward position, they're off. In the middle position, it's about what I'd want on the range. Now I can hear range commands, but gunfire is still muffled. And when it's turned all the way back to the amplify setting, essentially the tactical SWAT setting, you can literally turn your foot and hear the carpet fibers under your feet. No matter how high the small sounds are increased, the loud sounds are reduced to about what you'd hear with a .38 pistol cartridge through ordinary passive earmuffs. When people bring this up on internet gun forums, there's always someone who says, "Oh, that's ridiculous. You'll never have time to get the earmuffs on." Well, if the earmuffs are in your gun safe, maybe not. If the earmuffs are downstairs in the rec room Maybe not. If you keep them near the gun, it takes this long to get them on and turn on the switch. Now we don the vest, we have the gun, we're ready to keep moving. We have the redundant light and the redundant communications that we've brought with us, carried here in this kangaroo pocket. In a matter of a few seconds, we've enhanced our hearing to a superhuman level, where we can literally hear a guy breathing around the corner that we could not have heard with perfect unassisted hearing. If a shot is fired, particularly in an enclosed space such as a narrow hallway, the concussion tends to reverberate. Doctors tell us we'll probably lose permanently some degree of hearing out of that, but for the short term, all we're going to hear is a little bit of ringing, and it's going to tend to stun out our sense of hearing, one of our primary sensory acquisitions, at a time we most need it to find the intruder before he finds us. So for all these reasons, I kind of like the idea of having the amplified muffs next to the bed. I've heard people say that they wouldn't dare fire a gun without protected hearing inside. Well, you got to kind of prioritize. Yeah, you might lose a little bit of hearing if you have to fire, if you don't have muffs or don't have time to put them on. But if you need to fire to stop him from murdering you, how much are you going to hear in the grave afterwards? As we assess all these options, let's keep our priorities straight. But right here, we're looking at two that have been known to save people's lives. Let's talk about home defense ammunition. The first thing to bear in mind is have enough of it. The great majority of armed encounters in which armed citizens draw their weapons ends without a shot being fired. The suspect usually either flees or submits to citizen's arrest. When it goes bad, though, you never know how bad it's going to go. If you carry a gun on your person, it's never a bad idea to carry a spare magazine or a spare speed loader in case you do need an emergency reload. When you're preparing a rollout kit like the one we described earlier with the body armor, the pouch for redundant illumination, and communications, there's no reason not to strap a single or double cell magazine pouch like this one onto the vest. If things go really bad and your primary runs dry, you've got fresh ammunition right there on your person. It hasn't taken you any extra time to access it. With the long guns, you can attach a spare magazine to the AR-15 with the Ready Mag device that keeps the second right parallel to the first, or on the shotgun, the side saddle. Let's look at the type of ammunition we're going to be selecting. A lot of folks figure it's going to be in the house, so my key thing is I've got to have something that won't shoot through the walls, but will go deep enough into the bad guy to hurt him. We need to avoid magical thinking on this. Stop and think. How many of you watching this have ever been in a fight, hit the other guy as hard as you could in the belly, you were trying to put your fist all the way through him, but the best you could do was double him over? Safe to say, nobody's ever lived out one of those kung fu movies where your hand goes into the guy's body and then rips his spine out from the other side. Yet how many of us have ever gotten ticked off and put our fists through a sheetrock wall? Now let's compare those two experiences. Common sense tells us that anything that won't go through a sheetrock wall probably will not go deep enough into a 200-pound drug addict to stop him from continuing down the hallway to kill us or our children. So we need to find a middle ground. Remember, the purpose of the ammunition is to stop a lethal humanoid threat. The primary backstop, as callous as it may sound, is the body of the offender. In just handgun ammunition, let's start looking at the commonly available types. Full metal jacket, FMJ, commonly called hardball, was the military standard for virtually all the 20th century since 1911, and continues so to this day. Most of us believe it's manifestly unsafe for use in the home. The reason is it will tend to over-penetrate not only structures, but the intended target, the violent offender himself. This is 230 grain, 45 ACP hardball. You'll find, as a general rule, it'll go 26 to 30 inches in a muscle tissue simulating ballistic gelatin. Now, when you figure that the average adult male torso is only 9.5 to 10 inches front to back, that means if we had 3 human beings in line with each other, the single bullet would be entry, exit, entry into the second person behind him, exit, entry into the third, stopping somewhere inside his body. If we were in a gunfight, man-to-man, just you and the bad guy in the desert, like in the cowboy movie or something, that would be acceptable. We're talking about being in our own home. Let's assume the intruder has got you down. He's raising the chisel that he used to break in, and he's going to stab you in the chest. You come up with your .45, and never mind tunnel vision, which you're more likely than not to experience, his body physically blocks your view of anything behind him. And as you fire that shot that'll go through 30 inches, go through 3 men, you don't realize that behind him, your oldest son is running in behind him to pull him off you. Let's think about that now before it happens. Most of us would recommend jacketed hollow point ammunition. Same bullet weight, same velocity, but the hollow point bullet is designed to expand from the tensile resistance of soft tissue inside the cavity, essentially pushing the nose of the bullet out and creating not only a wider, more debilitating wound, but a parachute effect called mushroom effect that tends to slow down the projectile and usually, not always because nothing is 100%, but usually remain inside the body of the offender. That's why virtually every police department in America now issues hollow point or similar expanding bullets for public safety purposes. A third option is the frangible projectile. Basically, instead of solid lead or lead jacketed with copper, what we have is tiny birdshot pellets that are suspended in some type of liquid or epoxy, and in some of the frangibles, epoxy is the primary substance inside the jacket. It's very light, going very fast. When it strikes soft tissue, it will tend to basically shatter itself and spread outwards, sort of like a shotgun blast being fired inside the body, but a very small shotgun blast. The result is a wound that is not terribly deep, but does tend to be very wide. And it can be extremely debilitating when it's a frontal hit on a facing man with no serious hard intermediate target between the two. It is also the least likely to go through typical structures, wood lath, sheetrock, things of that nature. Downsides of it, it tends to be very expensive, often as much as $3 a cartridge. We know we need to run a couple of hundred rounds of the ammunition through the gun to make sure it's going to cycle perfectly before we can really trust it for home defense purposes, and that means about $600 just to see if the ammo runs in the gun. You'll also find that if you get a very heavy-set man or an angled shot, you may not get adequate penetration to stop his attack. This is why most of us have taken a middle ground, and with the handgun ammunition, will recommend the jacketed hollow point, or in the revolver cartridge, the semi-jacketed hollow point. In the shotguns, to quickly recap earlier, the solid slug will usually go through a car door and go deep enough to kill the driver. And some of them, notably the German Brennecke, I've seen go in one car door and out the opposite car door. Altogether too much penetration for what we're likely to encounter in the typical American home. Makes sense for long-range shooting and certain tactical applications, but it's not really geared for home defense. On the opposite end of the spectrum, we have the fine birdshot. Again, less likely to go through the walls from one end of the house to the other, but also because these tiny pellets, as soon as they start to spread out from the shot column, and instead of striking en masse as a single flying 1-ounce lump of lead, you've got this cloud of tiny pellets. Each pellet has to do the job by itself. And if you get a big, strapping guy who's wearing heavy winter clothing because he broke in during the winter, and you have to shoot him down the hallway, none of those pellets may go deep enough to stop his violent attack. It's with that in mind that most police use buckshot historically as their primary anti-personnel load. The larger pellets, here I'm holding 00 buckshot, double-aught colloquially, 9 pellets, each of them 33 caliber. From this gun, they'll be running on the order of 1,500 feet per second velocity. Buckshot will give you optimum penetration and optimum pattern distance to saturate multiple vital structures at, say, down the hall distance, and that makes it more versatile than the birdshot. There will be times when you will want to shoot through the wall. Let's say you've marshaled the whole family into the bedroom. You know whoever's kicking down that door is the enemy. As the door comes falling down and you see guns in their hands, you fire. You see one of the men you're shooting at go down, and the second ducks behind the wall, aiming the gun toward you, and you realize he's going to shoot through that wall with his gun, trying to kill you and your children. At that moment, I want something that's going to reach through that sheetrock and stop him from doing that when I have to shoot through the wall on my side. Each of us makes our own choices. Those are mine. Patio Productions has gone to the trouble of structuring a penetration test with 8 separate sheetrock walls. Between each set of 2, they set up a balloon to show what might and might not be struck as a given round continued going, let's say, the length of the house, fired from the north bedroom toward, let's say, the kitchen on the south side of the building. 9mm, 115 grain, full metal jacket, went through all 8 walls. The frangible 9mm still went through 7 of them. 357 Magnum, 125 grain jacketed hollow point, went through all 8. The frangible was 3 less, it went 5. The 230 grain jacketed hollow point went through all 8. So did 223 Remington 62 grain hollow point. So did 00 Buck, and so did the 1-ounce slug, both fired from 12-gauge shotguns. 12-gauge number 8 birdshot, the sort of load that you'd use on quail or other birds about this big, went through only 2 walls. But again, bear in mind, you have to ask yourself, would it have gone deep enough to stop a violent attacker? In the end, it's not, if you're worried about the projectiles going through the walls of the structure and harming innocent people, which certainly is a valid concern, there are other ways to address it. One way is to scope out beforehand where the encounter is likely to take place. Scope out your apartment, your condo, your house, like a general selecting a battleground. Determine that when that alarm goes off, you will ensconce, let's say, at point A. Analyze what would be behind you if your shot missed or went through the perpetrator. Is there a wall there that would go into another apartment or another condo, or God help us, into our own children's bedroom? If so, reinforce it now with things like heavy bookshelves or cartons of books. They're up against the wall and they literally act like a backstop. But because they are against the wall, the opponent cannot duck behind them and use them for cover. One of the reasons we tell people not to grab their gun and their flashlight and go looking for the bad guy is now the nature of the encounter becomes unpredictable. And as soon as you and he see each other and start moving, you'll tunnel in on one another. The surroundings will disappear from your consciousness, and basically gunfire can end up going everywhere. If you've selected the confrontation point, you pretty much know what his lane of fire is going to be when you engage him, and you certainly know what yours is. And that's going to give you a whole lot better control of the situation. In any kind of a crisis, it's imperative to have a plan of action beforehand. It's going to happen too fast for everyone to try to figure it out and coordinate themselves spontaneously when it does occur. When you became a parent, you probably did fire drills at home, like the fire drills your kids get at school, so they'll know what to do if there is a life-threatening emergency. Do the same with this, intrusion drills. A few role plays, maybe once or twice a year, when everyone in the family rehearses what they will do if the alarm goes off and they believe there's an intrusion into the household. The exact plan of action is going to be determined by multiple factors. What's the architectural layout of the home? How many people are there? Where do they sleep? You'll have one plan of action if every bedroom comes off a common hallway in the same section and same floor of the house. You may have another if your house is so constructed that the master bedroom might be on the north side, but the kids' bedrooms might be on the south side. The best plan to keep everyone from running around, getting in one another's line of fire, perhaps being exposed to an intruder who might take them hostage or use them as a human shield, is to go to ground, go static, and ensconce. We'll discuss shortly the concept of the ensconced defender principle. But basically, we go to ground and wait, force the intruders to come to us. Let's say the rooms are separate and you can't immediately get to the kids' room. Today also, given the state of medical care, we have probably more than ever elderly parents, 3 generations all living together in one household, and elderly, infirm people who perhaps can't get from their room to yours. So you may choose to make the child's nursery, the 80-year-old wheelchair-bound grandparent, make their room the safe room, and the mobile prime of life members of the family move to theirs. A very useful thing would be intercoms. If there's intercom connection between the bedrooms, you in the master bedroom can simply press a button, wake up the others, and tell them to go into lockdown. If the children are of an age of responsibility, we trust them to have a bedroom door they can lock that will be solid and will take a while to penetrate. Get the kid behind the cover of a big, heavily stacked bookshelf and wait until you and your significant other get there. You're going to have a much more manageable situation. The strategy of the ensconced defender revolves around having a safe room. That is, one designated room where every member of the family will gather if an intrusion is perceived. The safe room should have communications, should have various illumination options. We want cover and concealment, and in the armed household, of course, weapons with which to repel boarders. We'll get to the safe room by the planning that we've discussed elsewhere in the film, people knowing where to go as part of the intruder drill. If we have people in the home who are infirm, anything from infants in the nursery to an 80-year-old grandparent who is confined to bed, the best plan may be to suit up and cross the distance and gather there in that safe room. One of the things we have to look at tactically is cover and concealment against an armed intruder. Let's go to that next. Cover, something that will stop incoming fire, is one of the key tactical considerations in home defense. Many people recommend hiding behind the bed on the theory that the mattress will soak up bullets. But what gets missed there is it'll only soak up small caliber bullets, and then only if they're shot parallel to the mattress. If I've got a short guy down on his knees, this might give me some bit of cover. A standing man shooting downward is probably only going to clip the edge of the mattress. We can do better than that for cover and concealment, and we'll look at that next. The main purpose of the exercise is not to shoot the bad guy. The main purpose of the exercise is not to get shot. Shooting the bad guy is simply one of your options in accomplishing the main objective. Key thing, cover, concealment. Often misunderstood concepts. Cover is something you can expect to stop an incoming bullet. Concealment is something that hides you. Let's say my opponent was over here at about 9:30 to my position. I've ducked here behind this typical wall in an American home. Ask yourself, do I have cover or concealment? If you say cover, no. Might be cover against a simunitions paintball. It might be cover against a laser beam in a simulated exercise. But a high-powered bullet is going to tear right through that lath and sheetrock, and they're going to take particles of that out of my body at the medical examiner's office, along with particles of lead. If you said concealment, that's really not the right answer either. My opponent saw me duck behind here. He knows where I am. That means I'm not concealed. Proper way to take advantage of concealment is to use it to change positions and move unseen to by your opponent to some place where you have a more tactically advantageous position. Let's say I've come around the corner, I want to see what's here. I'm going to do a quick peek. That's one hand lightly touches the wall for balance, and it's a quick flicker in and out. We're trying for less than 1/10 of a second. About the time my head's coming back here, it's processing what it's seen. And when my head processes man with a gun over there, I'm not going to just stand here and test how much lead this wall can stop. I'm going to immediately be moving back to a different position, different angle, and re-engage from elsewhere. There's cover, there's concealment. Heck, I'm wearing cover, and one reason I recommend the body armor as part of the home defense plan is sometimes the only way to guarantee you'll have cover is to wear it. It's the one thing in the house that was designed to stop incoming gunfire. But not everyone has it. Those who have it won't always have time to put it on. And it only covers about plus minus 30% of the human body. It'd be a really good idea to have something in place that we could take resort to and get behind for cover that we knew would stop bullets from an armed intruder. Let's go now and take a look at how we can arrange that. There isn't much in the average American home that you can count on to stop a bullet. So if you think there might be a confrontation, it would be a good idea to start putting something together now that might stop incoming fire. I recommend big bookshelves. A bookshelf as high as the tallest person in the household who's likely to take cover behind it, up against a wall in a strategic position. I like right outside the master bedroom that lets me step outside, scan the hallway, and with a duck back, have something between me and anything down that hall that has a gun. You want the bookshelf solidly packed and at least 2 rows of books, wide enough that even if you blade yourself a little bit, you can get your whole torso behind it. You want it solidly packed, no airspace like this. Get small paperbacks or something to fill that in and pack it tight. The more tightly they're packed, the greater integrity they'll have. You don't necessarily need books. Periodicals will work fine. Packed paper is packed paper. Some of you all have American Rifleman magazine going back to the year of your birth. A solidly packed bookshelf filled with those is actually easier to create than hardcover books, because the magazines are all the same size and you'll have less airspace. That 230 grain 45 hardball round will go through 26 to 30 inches of muscle tissue simulating ballistic gelatin. You'll find with hard packed paper, take a bunch of books like these, tape them together so they'll be held about like they'd be held under tension, packed into a bookshelf. Shoot the darn things and see for yourself. Bring with you a probe and a ruler. You'll find generally they'll stop in about 6 inches of that hard-packed material. We're talking about keeping loaded, lethal weapons in the home. None of you watching this need me to tell you how serious a responsibility that is. What each of us has to do is find our particular best balance in condition of readiness. By that I mean, on the one hand, we have this gun so we can access it readily in case that door is kicked down in a heartbeat, and one of those terrible home invasions we've all read about is happening to us. On the other hand, we have the absolute responsibility to do all we can to keep these things away from people we have not authorized to access them. That would include little kids. It would include family members and circle of friends who we do not consider responsible enough to have access to them. And of course, it also includes denying accessibility to the very burglars and intruders we bought these guns to protect ourselves from. Starting over here, let's look at the different levels of readiness that we have as options. Certainly we could have the gun unloaded, locked in a safe, ammunition locked in a cabinet somewhere else in the house. But that would be a little bit like an insulin-dependent diabetic, keeping the syringe locked in one medicine cabinet and the insulin locked in another medicine cabinet in another bathroom elsewhere. It simply would not be accessible in time to be any good as emergency rescue equipment. The next level up is what you're looking at here. The cable locks that for many years have been standard with firearms sold in the United States are designed like this one to work on a gun that is kept completely unloaded. So we're going to have to access the key, turn it, remove the lock, access the ammunition, and load the firearm. Your next level up, something like the chamber guard on this Remington 870 shotgun, again, it's going to work best with an unloaded firearm. And of course, the key is only in the lock now for illustration purposes. It means we're going to constantly have to have a key on our person so we can access it immediately at a moment's notice. We're simply not going to have time to remember, did I leave it in the desk drawer or in the sock drawer? Here we have the mag guard on an M&P 15 rifle. Again, it's shown here with the key in place. We're going to have to turn the key, remove the guard, access the magazine, chamber around before we can begin active defense against a lethal force intrusion. Your next level up, one I'm personally more comfortable with, is going to be a locking system that gives you quick access to an already loaded firearm. This is the smallest one I've seen from Gun Vault, a company I've been using for many years. You turn the combination lock, a quick turn here, and the already loaded pistol is accessible. It's also a size that allows you to bolt it to the transmission hump in your automobile. If you're licensed to carry concealed, but when you're out and about, you occasionally go into gun-free zones. You have to drop by the courthouse to get a copy of a deed, for example. If you can't bring the gun in there and you're as uncomfortable as I am with leaving loaded guns in unattended motor vehicles, something like this is an excellent option. Here we have the conventional gun vaults, which have either battery electronic operation, here plugged in, or with battery backup, or with the key as a manual backup in case all power fails. With one of these, we obviously have to have the key with us. We insert a quick turn, and the already loaded gun is going to be accessible. What this means is we have to constantly have a keychain on our person. For many people, what works is having just this particular key on a necklace or a keychain worn around the neck. You can also set them for push-button combinations. If you look closely, you'll see it's shaped for the human hand. Since I'm behind the device, instead of hitting by touch, like touch typing as I normally would with the proprietary combination, which you set for yourself, again, we have pretty quick access. Your highest and, for many people, most practical level is simply to carry the loaded gun on the person while in the home. When the gun is on your person, whatever room you happen to be in, it is instantly accessible to you. At the same time, when it's on your person, access is denied to unauthorized people. In terms of home defense, it's certainly the most practical approach. For X number of us, as we look at our lifestyle, our circle of friends, our family and extended family, it might not be within the family's social norm and dress code to be carrying the Smith & Wesson 357 exposed in this leather arsenal holster around the house or at the family reunion. In that case, you can still have that ready access with a choice of gun, holster, and wardrobe, but allows for discrete concealability and instant access. Something like a J-frame Smith & Wesson in a pocket holster. The gun is small, the gun is adequately powerful. The holster allows it to be safely carried and carried in an orientation where it's always going to be at the proper angle for the reaching hand. Again, keeping the weapon constantly accessible to you, but constantly inaccessible to any unauthorized personnel. By simply putting the gun on when you get up in the morning, taking it off when you go to bed, and returning it to the bedside vault, you have the best of both worlds. It may be an adjustment in lifestyle. Obviously, there's going to be more investment in equipment. But in the end, it will be perhaps the best balance of denying access to the unauthorized and keeping instant access for those who are the designated home protectors. One thing we have to consider when we talk about home defense is something that might happen outside the immediate boundaries of the house. Here in Florida a few years ago, a friend of mine was walking his dog. Another huge, vicious dog came up, attacked him and his animal. He had a .45, he drew, and he shot and killed that animal in time to keep it from killing his dog and maiming him. 3 years ago, I was walking out of my house, had to shoot a poisonous snake just outside the carport, and I was really glad I had a .357 pistol on. It sounds paranoid to say you're going to put on a gun to go out and take the garbage down to the can at the curb. Let's look at 3 cases where a situation occurred in just those circumstances. Case 1, West Coast. Retired police officer is about to put the garbage out and is shot and killed in a drive-by shooting, unarmed and helpless to shoot back, helpless to save his life. Case 2, New York City, several years ago. A working police officer off duty is taking the garbage out, didn't feel a need to have a gun on. He observes a bunch of punks mugging an elderly woman. He intervened, they pulled out iron pipes. He actually won, he prevailed, a man of courage, but his hands were so badly shattered by the pipes during that fight, he wound up medically retired and having to leave the job that he loved. Case 3, same city. A detective who put on a 2-inch .38 to go outside and take out the garbage. And when he saw violence erupting in the yard next door, moved in, fulfilled his oath to protect and serve, contained the situation magnificently, and emerged without a scratch. The guy with a gun comes out without a scratch. The guy without a gun is dead. The other guy without a gun is crippled for life. Where I come from, they call that a clue. How are the police going to gain entry? It's not a good plan to figure you'll walk through an area that's just been invaded by an armed criminal and say, "Excuse me, Mr. Armed Home Invader, I need to get to the door to let the police in to arrest you." Some folks have advised, well, just tell the cops, batter down the door. I'll tell you right now, that's not going to work. The police know that those who harass others read these silly revenge books that say, if someone has insulted you, get revenge on them by ordering a ton of manure dumped in their lawn, ordering $100 worth of pizza delivered to their house, or call the police from an untraceable phone, give them your enemy's address, and say, "Help, help, I'm being murdered." Send the police to kick the door down. The cops are not going to kick down your door based on an unsubstantiated complaint from a cell phone. What I would suggest is that you have a key to your home on a light stick. The most common is Sialume. It was developed originally for divers who use it to mark objects in murky waters. It'll be a plastic tube similar to this. As you bend it, you'll feel a glass ampoule inside break. Shake it, and for 20 to 30 minutes, it'll glow bright yellow, blue, or red. This is a fairly recent development, electric light stick. Has a little flashlight attachment, it glows in the given color, or can flash in the given color. Have a key to the house on it. Tell the dispatcher, I'm throwing a key to the front door or the back door, whatever door you've chosen, onto the front lawn on a light stick. They'll know what you're talking about. If the lawn where you're going to throw it is the front of the house on the east side, tell them the lawn is on the east side. Police are accustomed to responding to compass points. This will allow them to quickly, positively make entry without damage. One thing that would be really helpful, if you could draw a diagram of the floor plan of your house. And if it's 2 stories, do one on one side, the other story on the other. Bring them down to some places like Mailboxes or Us or Kinko's or whatever. Have them duplicated to about this size and laminated in clear plastic. That way, when you throw it out, if there's rain or snow on the ground, it won't render it illegible. But if a strange officer who's never been in your home has to now search it for an armed and dangerous person, you don't know what a godsend it is to have an idea where the staircases are, what the floor plan is, etc. Where are you going to be when the responding officers arrive? That will probably be dictated by the situation, and there's a substantial amount of possible conditional branching there. Let's say that we have a suspect at gunpoint. If the officers come in and they can see me with the gun out, but cannot see the perpetrator on the ground. They are going to shout, "Police." I turn toward them with a gun in my hand. I'm going to get lit up. It happened last year in a western city. This is much more threatening than this. So to prevent that mistaken identity, there are a few different things that we can do here. First, I want to be in a position where I'm in a corner. If that door is locked, nothing's coming up behind me to surprise me. I can scan any angle of approach. When I've determined that the police are en route, I can holster the weapon, one-handed by feel, a necessary survival skill, not just a style thing. And if now I'm taken at gunpoint by the officers, I'm a much less threatening presence. Instead of having to drop a loaded gun from here, possibly within reach of the felon that I've proned out on the floor, I simply say, "Officer, I'm slowly raising my empty hands now." No threat to the officer, no gun bouncing on the floor where a perpetrator can grab it and shoot me or the officers, and a much better scenario all around. If the hand is on the holstered weapon, we can access the threat as quickly as we could from a low ready. In fact, most of you have practiced working from the holster enough that this is actually second nature for you. But it's a much safer way to be, a much safer posture to be in when you're confronted by the responding officers. As you call in, if you do have the person at gunpoint, you want to describe yourself, what you look like, what you're wearing. Explain to them where in the house you are, that you have a gun in your hand and you are holding the suspect at gunpoint. Describe the suspect, his physical description, and what he may be wearing. The more input that we can get to the responding officers, the less likelihood there's going to be of a mistaken identity situation. When you've taken a perpetrator at gunpoint, never attempt to approach, search, disarm, or put him in handcuffs or tie him up. It's a loser's game. These guys spend hours in the prison exercise yards practicing to overpower, disarm, and murder the next police officer who tries to take them at gunpoint. You're doing it for the first time against a hardened criminal. It's a loser's game. Keep your distance. When the officers get there, identify yourself, identify the perpetrator, remind them, "Sir, I have not searched him. He may still be armed." Let's look at the possibility that you've had to shoot the perpetrator before the officers arrive. If it's obvious the perpetrator is down and out of the fight and there are no more present, I would get back to a position where I still had cover and could continue to scan, because just because you haven't seen another accomplice doesn't mean there isn't one. Just because this guy looks like he's down and out doesn't mean that he is. Some of them will play possum, hoping that you'll turn your back or come rushing up to help them, and that's when you'll be attacked a second time. Keep your distance. I know compassion tells you to move forward and try to help treat a gunshot wound now that he appears to be helpless. You've got to remember that in the balance of competing harms and needs, if this man is playing possum and faking it, if you reach down without a gun in your hand to try to help him, he now becomes the actor, you the reactor, and there's an excellent chance you'll be overpowered and disarmed. You are probably the only armed person capable of keeping this man from harming anyone until the officers get there. And your greater duty to yourself and others is that you keep your distance so you can maintain that control. If you've had to shoot the man, tell 911. He forced me to shoot him. The suspect is down. They may ask you what type of wound. Describe it as best you can. Maintain your distance from him. When the officers get there, it would be best for the gun to be holstered or set down somewhere where you can still reach it if the emergency reactivates, but where it's far enough away from the downed perpetrator that he cannot reach it. The officers will ask you what happened. Conventional advice is to say nothing. Well, conventional advice comes from defense lawyers whose clientele in the high 90th percentile are guilty as charged. And they tell them to say nothing because anything they say would be a lie that would be exposed or would hang them by their own tongue. When you are the one who has acted correctly, I think a different set of protocols is necessary. And what I've advised for many years has been a 5-point checklist. explain, first, this man attacked me, or whatever the exact dynamics were of the incident that led to his shooting. Second, I will sign the complaint. These two statements confirm the man on the ground who looks like a victim is actually the perpetrator. You who prevailed were the victim complainant. Point out any evidence. There are going to be paramedics here in a moment trampling the scene and lots of responding detectives and investigators. Anything that might prove your innocence needs to be pointed out before it disappears. If there are any other witnesses, identify them to the officers. And finally, then, gentlemen, you'll have my full cooperation after I've spoken with counsel. Over the years, a number of myths have arisen about the best way to handle a home intrusion. And some of them are dangerous enough that if you follow the bad advice, it can send you to prison. Probably the most prevalent of those is the guy who tells you, shoot the bad guy on the porch, drag him inside, and put a kitchen knife in his hand before you call the police, or some variation of that. Everybody's heard that somewhere. I've talked to guys who've heard it from police, who've heard it from firearms instructors, who've heard it from attorneys. One of my attorneys was given that advice by a law professor at Harvard Law School. And it'll get you sent to prison several times over. First, you're never going to get away with that. The time is long past when you ever could have. The state of forensic evidence today is such that you cannot move bodies, plant weapons, and go undetected. Anytime a body is dragged, something occurs called transfer. Microscopic body hairs and skin cells from the body, microscopic fibers from the clothing that you can't see, but the evidence technicians will most certainly find, will be transferred to the floor or ground surface that the body is moved over. You can get down on your hands and knees with a bucket of Lest oil and clean up the bloodstains till you don't see anything. And all we have to do is come in later, sprinkle something called luminol, turn out the lights, turn on our special lamp, and the reagent will glow green and show us where the bloodstains were that you could not see with the naked eye, and we'll be able to identify them, track the movement, DNA them right to the body. The flip side of transfer is microscopic carpet fibers, tiny wood fibers from a bare floor and things of that nature will transfer onto the skin and the clothing of the body that was moved. We know there is such a thing as use patterns of fingerprints, the patterns that will be formed in normal routine handling of a knife or some other weapon. We know what they are. You probably don't. The evidence technicians also know exactly what the pattern is when a knife is pressed into the fingers of a dead hand, and they're going to pick up on it. You just can't get away with that anymore. Even if the shooting happens in Mayberry RFD, it's not going to be Deputy Barney Fife that does the investigation. It's going to be very experienced, very highly trained homicide detectives from the state police with a multi-million-dollar crime lab behind them. Once that deception is discovered, you are circling the drain at a high rate of speed. Let's look at what you've left yourself open for. First, the alteration of evidence is a crime in every single state. In some states, the codes and the statutes describe it as such, alteration of evidence. Usually it comes under the umbrella of obstruction of justice. And you're pretty much prima facie guilty. You're unlikely to get out of that one. Second, if the prosecutor wants to make an example out of you, it's a slam dunk for the prosecutor to convince a grand jury to indict you for manslaughter. Manslaughter, remember, is a reckless disregard of human life encompassing negligence, which causes an unwarranted death. The public has read over the years of all the bad cops who carried a throw-down gun to plant on the guy they panicked and shot by mistake. They now find out you have planted a weapon. You fit the profile, and it's a slam dunk for them to indict you for manslaughter. Third, you've just turned what was probably a justifiable or at least excusable homicide into a very strong case of premeditated murder. The reason is most judges will allow the prosecutor to argue that alteration of evidence after the fact is construable as evidence of prior planning of a crime. And fourth, if you can remember the last person who told you drag him inside, plant a weapon, then call the police and lie, the giving of the advice is construable as subornation of perjury. To suborn perjury means that you have advised or exhorted another person to lie under oath. And that advice is absolutely implicit in the whole drag him inside and plant a weapon on him and alter the evidence paradigm. In my state, where I've been a sworn officer for 36 years, the subornation of perjury is a Class 4 felony. The giving of the advice is construable as a felony. And that's nature's way of telling you is pretty darn stupid advice. Another of the prevalent myths that you'll hear is, I can shoot any stranger I find in my house. The Castle Doctrine says so. No, that's not what the Castle Doctrine says. If you look it up and study it, Castle Doctrine, like so much of law in America, comes from the English common law, one principle of which held that an Englishman's home was his castle, and attacked there, he need not retreat. That's all it says. Yeah, your home is your castle, but there's nothing in there that says the castle can include an execution chamber or a torture chamber. Basically, if you actually read the fine print in the statutes, the codes, and the case law in your own state, you'll find that there still needs to be some reasonable belief that the person you shoot presented a clear and present danger to you and to others in the household. The common paradigm is the assumption that any stranger you find in the house is an intruder who is bent on rape, murder, and mayhem. Yeah, that could be the case. That's why I keep a loaded gun at home, and that's why so many of you do. But we all have to consider there are other possibilities. Ask yourself, how many friends, relatives, members of extended family have a key to your home? Now, we wouldn't have given those people those keys if we did not consider them responsible people that we trusted. However, any of us, no matter how cool, no matter how responsible, can go through a life crisis that results in bad thinking and bad judgment. Consider the case of the man who discovered in a late-night discussion with his wife that she'd been having a long-term affair with her tennis coach and was planning to run away with him. The guy just walked out of the house in a fog, got in his car, and drove away. And as he began to come to his senses, realized, I left my wallet in the house. I don't have credit cards to check into a hotel room. I don't even have my cell phone with me. I've got to go somewhere, and, well, my buddy gave me a key to his house, and it's 2 in the morning, and I don't have a phone to call him anyway. I'll just let myself in, and he'll understand. Well, now we've got that unexpected stranger in the dark. You're going to shoot him because you think Castle Doctrine says so? I don't think so. One of my graduates told me of an incident he experienced shortly after taking my class. He heard the bump in the night, grabbed his gun, determined there's a strange man in the living room. He said, before your class, I would have shot that guy in the dark. I lit him up with a flashlight and yelled, "Don't move!" And I realized it was my brother-in-law. The intruder was the 19-year-old brother of his wife. He was due to come that following weekend to visit, but he'd finished his college finals early, got to the house late, had a key to the house, and figured, I'll just let myself in, stretch out on the couch, and surprise them when they find me there tomorrow morning. Now, as they say at Holiday Inn, the best surprise is no surprise. But does anyone think that situation justifies shooting the unidentified stranger in the dark? This sort of thing is why we can't have false rules of engagement that make people falsely believe they can shoot anyone who's a stranger to them that they find in their home. Consider the possibility that perhaps before you got home from work, the power went out and the significant other called the electricians. You get there and see the house in darkness, you enter through the front door, and you see a strange male figure down the hallway. You're going to start shooting over that? I don't think so. There's an almost infinite number of situations that could result in such tragic mistaken identity shootings. We've got to take them into consideration, and that's why the belief that Castle Doctrine allows you to shoot to death anyone you find in your home under any circumstances is a myth that needs to be erased. Another of the prevalent myths is that the best thing to do if you perceive there may be an intruder is to grab your gun in one hand and your flashlight in the other and go looking for the bad guy. History, reality combine to tell us that this is a loser's strategy. If you think about it, what we're looking at is a microcosm of what a soldier would call a MOUT environment, M-O-U-T, military operation, urban terrain. Basically, it's house-to-house combat. Any combat soldier you know will tell you that, assuming conventional architecture and small arms, house-to-house combat requires a force of up to 9 times the size of the defending force to invade and dislodge that defending force. Now let's start looking at that. You are the defending force. You've grabbed the gun, you've grabbed the light, and you've gone looking for the intruder. Unless you're a ninja who has mastered invisibility and you have the power of movement and total silence, the bad guy, who's going to be hyper alert, is going to hear you coming. He's going to ensconce. He's going to take cover behind a wall, behind a sofa, behind the entertainment center. He's going to take his gun and cover the door. Now, as you come looking for him, you've undergone a role reversal. He now has that huge 9-to-1 advantage of the ensconced defender because he's gone to ground in one position. You have become the mobile force and, in effect, the invading force. If you've ever searched a room, as many of us working on this film have for real, you know that searching a room is not looking at one thing. It's looking at dozens of things. You've got to scan every angle. You've got to look high and low, the natural positions of ambush. You've got to look and see if that straight geometric wall has anything rough and irregular behind it. You've got to look and see if that rough pile of laundry over here might have a straight line in it like a gun barrel. You see, that's why they call it hiding. You've got to process. You've got to go through what Colonel John Boyd famously called the OODA loop, his definition of the stages of reaction. The first O was for observe, pick up what's there. The second O was to orient, determine what you've just seen means. Third, the D is for decide what you have to do now. And the A was for act, initiate your action. We all know that action beats reaction. You've got to do all that. You've got to determine, is that a piece of a human being? Is there a whole human being there? Are they someone I need to shoot? Are they someone I can take at gunpoint? All he's got to do, because he's already waiting and has his gun aimed with his finger on the trigger, is pull the trigger at the moment a part of your body enters the door. You're too far behind the loop. You cannot possibly prevail on that unless the guy is incredibly slow and stupid. This is why your professionals will tell you, you ensconce and make the other guy come to you. The German Goethe said, der Amboss oder Hammer sein. The translation is, you can be the hammer or you can be the anvil. And I think the analogy here is, you can be the hunter in the tree stand or you can be the deer. I'm heading for the tree stand, and if you're smart, I think you'll come with me. Your best example from history of the advantage of the ensconced defender strategy is probably the battle for the Alamo. The year was 1836 in what is now San Antonio, Texas. If you've been to the Alamo, you know the complex was much larger than it was depicted in the movies and the TV shows. And you also know, as you saw the maps of the Alamo complex at the time, you saw that before the city of San Antonio grew up around it, there was a broad, flat plain surrounding the mission complex in every direction. There was nowhere closer than 200 yards where General Santa Anna could position his troops with any kind of cover. What you had there was 188 raggedy butt freedom fighters from Texas and Tennessee that you probably could have counted on your fingers, the number that had any serious military training. For 13 days, stood off thousands of the most highly trained, battle-hardened troops in the Western Hemisphere. Why? The advantage of the ensconced defender. Behind the adobe walls, they could not be seen. The invading force knew they were there, but didn't know exactly how many, didn't know exactly where they were to pinpoint them. Those inside knew where the enemy had to come, and crossing that broad, flat plain, the soldiers had to march into the devastating rifle fire of the Texans and the Tennesseans. And if you study the history of it, it'll tell you that by the time the last defender had fallen, they had killed, not just inflicted casualties, had killed 8.5 of the enemy apiece. That's your classic example of the power of the ensconced defender position. Take cover. Canalize the assault, a military term that means force the assailant to come into a corridor where you know they must come, where they have no cover against you, but you have cover against them. It's the winning strategy. Any SWAT team that does simunitions training, role-play training, where we're shooting back and forth, will tell you that whoever is the mobile party in a building search can expect to take tremendous casualties. A lone person attempting to do a building search against just one opponent who knows how to ensconce and ambush them is probably going to be killed a high 90th percentile of the time. We've learned from history, and Santayana was right. Those who do not learn from history are doomed to repeat it. Thank you for taking the time that you have to view this film. I honestly hope you'll never need it. There are people out there who will tell you that armed home defense is an exercise in paranoia. Well, that's like saying if you have fire extinguishers and smoke alarms in your home, you're paranoid. In either case, it's simply a recognition that bad things can happen to good people, and wise good people will prepare for them. If you think about it, your defensive firearm and your fire extinguisher are directly analogous. The extinguisher doesn't mean you don't need firefighters, and it doesn't make you one. And the home defense gun doesn't mean that you don't need police service, and it doesn't make you a cop. The fire extinguisher and the defensive firearm are emergency rescue tools designed for the first responder to cut a lane of safety against potential death for themselves and their loved ones, and get clear of that danger until the designated professionals can get there and do their job. I know you recognize that. I appreciate your responsibility. Be safe and keep your family safe.